Hello, I'm Howard Green. Well, no rest for those worried about sovereign debt issues in Europe. Ireland and Portugal are being monitored by the basis point. The cost of insuring Irish and Portuguese debt has spiked almost $600,000 to insure $10 million of Irish debt, almost $500,000 to insure $10 million of Portuguese debt, suggesting a high risk of restructuring in both cases. Joining us today, Alex Jurszewski of Recovery Partners. Welcome back to the program, Alex.
Thank you, Howard.
So why the recent spike in yields in both Ireland and Portugal? What's new there?
Well, this goes back to what we were saying midsummer when we talked about this at the earlier G20, and we were basically of the opinion that the sovereign debt crisis is still in its early stages. Both these countries face extremely strong headwinds in their attempts to get their fiscal house in order, and the market is simply reflecting the fact that it's getting increasingly nervous about the ability of these governments to implement plans that are going to get them out of the mess.
But was there some specific thing that made investors say, hey, all of a sudden I'm feeling less comfortable about these places?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that's making investors feel less comfortable is the fact that these restructuring plans aren't proceeding as quick as investors would like. They're looking at the borrowing calendar that these economies face. These debt operations need to be refunded. There's existing debt that needs to be rolled over. There's new debt that needs to be raised. And the market's simply saying, well, we don't know if these guys are going to be able to do it. And they're seeking to defend themselves from that type of event by requiring higher yields in order to hold the paper. So
going back to Greece, you've told us a few times that you think that it's inevitable that Greek debt will be restructured. When might that be, and do you see the same happening in Ireland and Portugal?
Well, I don't think it's inevitable in any of these places, but it's a very high probability. What those spreads are telling you on the CDSs and on the bonds, essentially, is that there's, for all three of those economies, there's a 40 to 50% plus chance of default occurring over the next 5 years. That's a very, very high probability of default. You know, when it's going to happen, nobody can predict. If it's going to happen, well, maybe it won't. There's a tremendous resistance within the European Central Bank and the IMF to restructure these debts, because the moment you start restructuring the debt, you're cutting back the exposures, and banks and other investors who've lent to these economies are going to have to take a chop. And that's been the reluctance so far.
And so if one is restructured, will that light the fuse on others?
Well, absolutely. You know, I think I was on the program last time where I said the last thing an economy wants in this scenario is to be classified in with the basket cases. You want to keep your fiscal house in good shape, you want to keep your nose clean, and you want to be out of the group that's regarded as weak. If one of these weak sisters falls by the wayside and we get a restructuring process happening, the markets will take that very, very badly. It'll be viewed as, you know, the first crack in the dike, and potentially the whole structure can come down.
The whole structure can come down?
By that I mean the euro. The euro would be under significant pressure if you got a default, a significant requirement to undertake restructuring among these economies within the euro.
What if all three of them had to be restructured? What would be the impact of that?
I think that would be very serious for world markets. I think you'd likely see another round of financial turbulence, flight to safety, which could have odd consequences in this scenario. But I don't think it would be anything good, Howard. I think it would be extremely destabilizing.
And so what do you advise investors then who have exposure in Europe?
Well, I think investors who have exposures in Europe, I think you want to make sure, if you've got fixed interest exposures, you want to make sure that those are of a shorter term nature. I think you want to perhaps look at taking out some currency insurance depending on your home currency, and you maybe want to diversify into some investment areas that you're not currently exposed to. I think government debt right now should be relatively out of favor relative to corporate debt, because with corporate debt what you get is a claim on assets. What you get with government debt is a claim on future tax revenues, and as we've seen in many of these places, the tax bases have shrunk, the ability of governments to keep up expenditures is being reduced, and so the relative risk of corporate debt versus sovereign debt, I think, is swung in favor of sovereign debt. As for equities, I think equities are facing some extremely tough headwinds here, and it's very much a trader's market as opposed to just get yourself some exposure and ride the index.
About 45 seconds left. Those CDS prices that I quoted in the intro, if you buy CDS protection now, is there somebody standing behind it? Because that was not the case prior to the crisis with AIG.
Well, yeah. I mean, with CDS, what you're buying typically on an over-the-counter basis is a custom-made contract that insures you against default of a certain class of debt. What typically stands behind that is the credit of the bank that is issuing the CDS. This is an over-the-counter product, so you really have to look, when you're looking at engaging this type of hedging, at the credit quality of the institution that you're buying the contract from.
Okay, we will leave it there. Good to have you back with us, Alex.
Great. Thank you, Howard.
Alex Drashevsky of Recovery Partners. We'll be right back on Headline with Jackie McNish on Cisco and Google.